These Tech Talks are informal and engaging events that will cover a wide range of technical concepts and ideas. They are created to provide a learning platform to get to know the leaders in the industry, share their stories, and understand various IT subjects. Today's session is focused on IT security, cybersecurity, and the practice of protecting critical systems and sensitive information from digital attacks that may cause damage or harm to hardware, software, electronic data, or disruption of services. If you would like to share information or participate in their conversation, please raise your hand and we will call upon you. When we unmute you, it takes a little bit for the microphone to open up, so please pause before speaking. We have a large group today, so please make your questions brief. And we will call upon you and open the queue. With that, I would like to introduce our panel today. With us today is Russ Nichols, is our host and is Acting State Chief Information Officer and Director of the California Department of Technology. Vitaliy Panych is our State Chief Information Security Officer at the California Department of Technology, and Jonathan Nunez, Commander of this California Cybersecurity Integration Center, also called CalCSIC. Russ?
All right, thank you, Janelle. And thank you everybody for joining us today. This is our inaugural event, so we're planning to have more of these and more topics. It's a session where we'll go into a little more depth than we do in normal vendor forums, be really topic specific and dive in with some experts in whatever the topic has to be. In the future, we're talking about other topics that could be brought to bear, but if there are suggestions for specific topics that people would like to see addressed, we can send those to the policy mailbox at CDT, and we will look through those topics and see what we can get prepared. So as Janelle mentioned, joining me today are two of our preeminent leaders in the cybersecurity area for the state of California that really represent two different aspects. One, the policy and the preparatory actions that help protect our systems, our data, the people of California. That's Vitaliy Panych, our Chief State ISO. And at the other end, maybe the tip of the spear as it relates to cybersecurity, dealing with threat intelligence and risks that are right here present right now, and then how we respond to those. Jonathan Nunez, the commander of CalCSIC. So thank you both for coming on today, being the guinea pigs in this process as we go through this. So cybersecurity is a huge and very technical topic. We throw around a whole bunch of acronyms. So let's start with that preventative, with the attacks and the things we do in responding to attacks. Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about what CalCSIC really is and how it came to be?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Russ, for having me today. Again, I am the commander of the CalCSIC. You know, the CalCSIC actually has been around since 2015. We ran as a proof of concept for about 4 years until our legal codification in California code in September 2019. At that point, we had become a fully funded agency, and today we are broken down into 3 different branches. We have our mission support branch, which supports all of our technical sort of IT engineering operations. We have a cyber threat intelligence branch, which is a fully functioning cyber threat intelligence branch, managing everything from the collection, analysis, all the way to the dissemination and reporting. And then finally, we have a defensive cyber operations branch, which is effectively our incident response function. It's the function that provides threat hunting, tactical incident response, as well as digital forensics, as well as wargaming and tabletop training exercises. So all 3 together compose the CalCSIC to perform what is our primary mission, which is to reduce the severity and likelihood of a cyber attack or impact of a cyber attack to the state of California. We operate, again, across all of the SLTTP stack. Again, that's state, local, territorial, tribal, and private sector entities with the focus, again, to impacts to the state of California or its economy.
So really, if I may interject a little bit, just to rewind the clock, I remember back in 2015. So I've ran and managed and stood up multiple security operations teams within the state, employment development department to franchise tax board, and then in 2015, the California Department of Corrections. I remember, we, as a state back then, it seems like almost yesterday, but as a state back then, we tend to operate a little bit in a silo. The state of California is distributed, federated in multiple facets and avenues. So we really need to have strong governance, number one, which my office is in charge of policies, standards, setting up a governance framework at the state, as well as enabling departments to facilitate a strong risk management practice. But then back in 2015, I saw this value of having a CalSIC to support or being the operational force multiplier or enabler to our operations teams, notably exchanging threat intel, telemetry around and all the indicators of compromise we collect and see on our networks as long as we conduct our operational duties and activities. So really there needed to be this kind of centralized unifying force to connect all of us together, really have a collaborative, and we'll definitely get into kind of how we operate today, because at the end of the day, CalSIC has matured from 2015 to where we are now. And without this collaborative approach, that could not have happened.
And just a little more on CalSIC itself. It's actually supported by not just one organization, but several. Can you guys talk about the participants?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, integration being the operative word, meaning we are a matrix organization today comprised of many partners, including CDT, CHP, being California Highway Patrol, specifically their Computer Crimes Investigation Unit, California Military Department, as well as representatives from the FBI, as well as CISA and others.
Thank you. And in our cybersecurity efforts, we've talked a lot about the state departments, but how do the private sector folks participate in that? They've stepped up and helped a lot through the pandemic and a lot of the response activities we've had. So how can they help double down to raise the bar of cybersecurity in the state?
Really, yeah, emphasis on collaboration and partnerships. As Jonathan mentioned, we have a lot of public sector partners, as well as including locals and our federal partners. We do have the California Cybersecurity Task Force, which brings in a lot of our private sector partners. So that's an opportunity there to kind of participate and interject. As well as I do want to emphasize CalSecure. So if we focus on some of the technical capacities and capabilities that we've outlined in CalSecure, notably on the horizon map, if you look to the left, there's 29 technical capabilities that we all as an organization must achieve. And it's not just a checkbox level exercise. The technical capabilities must be implemented, integrated, operated, and managed on a continuous basis. And there's a lot behind that in terms of making it happen. So I see a lot of our private sector partners can help really articulate to our leaders within our state agencies and how we not only just check off the box and implement a capability, but on a continuous basis, operate and maintain. It's one thing to have a vulnerability scanner. It's a whole different battle to have a process behind it when you scan, identify, prioritize, categorize gaps and risks, and really put them into context in the context of appropriate threats that we're seeing. So there's multiple product stack providers that I'll say that can help achieve certain capabilities. But on top of that, helping with our CalSIC mission is contextualizing risks in the form of not just technical telemetry, but data, information, and an understanding. Because security, it is a technical heavy topic, but it doesn't need to be a lot of times. It's a lot of times it's the non-technical soft skills that need to be highlighted and prevail to make those capabilities more effective and work and operate at utmost efficiency.
Thanks, Vitaliy. All right, we'll come back and talk about some incident response and some detail here in a minute. But since you mentioned CalSecure, let's go back and talk about what CalSecure is. So cybersecurity in general has really matured over the last few years. For a long time, the state didn't have really a guiding strategy. We were a little bit siloed departments. Some departments were farther ahead than others, but they really didn't have that North Star, that unifying document that said where we want to go as an organization. So Vitaliy, maybe tell us a little bit about how CalSecure was developed, what state entities now need to do, and where we go with that document.
Ultimately, CalSecure, the development of CalSecure started in 2018, many years ago in the cybersecurity time frame. Approximately 60 organizations participated in developing CalSecure. So we started with figuring out really what are the high level tenets that need to comprise CalSecure, which is really our guiding framework. So a lot of, we looked at all of our gaps, you know, what are we seeing as far as our gaps, our attack surface, the threats and vulnerabilities out there, and working backwards from there. And it's not just technical gaps, gaps in governance, gaps in our workforce. Obviously, cybersecurity workforce is tough to deal with today because of this almost zero or negative unemployment rate within cybersecurity professionals. So we separated the framework into three pillars: people, process, and technology. People being our workforce driving efforts, and then processes around governance, how we interact between multiple governance committees, how we prioritize, elevate, and raise the level of risks, how we keep ourselves accountable as state agencies. You know, we've outlined an oversight process where we conduct audits, assessments, keep ourselves really accountable to our framework, our guiding framework, the state administrative manual, the state information management manual, what we prescribe through policies and standards within our governing framework within the process side. Then the technology outlines the technical capabilities that we all must strive and achieve on an ongoing basis. So really it's a collaborative approach consisting of pretty much every state agency participated, as well as private sector folks that help really create the framework.
Thank you, Vitaliy. As we mentioned, cybersecurity is a monumental area. It's lots of detail, always maturing. The threats are always maturing and changing. From first, maybe a strategy perspective as it relates to cybersecure, yes. Do you see any challenges in continuing to mature that at the policy level? And then, Jonathan, I'm going to ask you the same type of question on that front end side as well.
Challenges, I definitely would be naive to say that there aren't any challenges. There's certainly challenges all along the way. Challenges in being able to elevate cybersecurity conversations at all appropriate levels, whether it's in your IT shop, whether prevailing what a healthy vulnerability management, patch management system and their process should look like, but also translating those kind of heavy topics as we refer to them into business speak and really prioritizing or enabling our departmental directors to support cybersecurity being a primary focus of the mission. Really, without cybersecurity, your mission fails, you know, continuity fails, availability of systems may potentially, or is likelihood, or the likelihood raises that it can fail, as we've seen throughout all these incidents. So really elevating the vision and articulating adoption of our CalSecure framework within all levels of government is kind of primary foundation.
Thank you, Vitaliy. Being the old guy on the panel, I can tell you early in my state career, as we developed solutions A lot of times security was an afterthought. We developed the functionality and the performance and the things the system was supposed to do. And at the very end, we'd say, oh yeah, and we've got to put some security in this. And I think that world has changed, not just for the IT folks, but as we digitize the business of the state, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a dispatching system used by one of our emergency responders, a case management system, something that provides benefits directly to the residents of California. Security has got to be in the forefront of that conversation. And Vitaliy, I think that's what you're alluding to in CalSecure. It's really maturing that and figuring out how we have that conversation on the business side, not just the technology side. So the chiefs of our lines of business, the directors of departments, the undersecretaries and secretaries of agencies, they should be just as in tune and aware of our cybersecurity needs as the technology folks. The technology folks are the how, but really protecting the business is the goal. Let's change that to the other side. That attack surface is constantly changing. The tools are changing. So Jonathan, actually, before I dig into that, I just used a cyber term, and cybersecurity is one of those things that's got more acronyms and terms than just about any other area of IT. What is an attack surface?
So an attack surface is really just the surface that an attacker might be able to permeate to get access or unauthorized access to whatever is behind that attack surface. We can, an attack surface today has really been defined a number of different ways. It could be physical facilities, it could be source code. When we, the CalSec, think about attack surface, we think about digital assets actually on the internet, communicating directly with the internet, directly connected to the internet. And so that's what we think about when we think about attack surface in terms of what its definition is. We also think about how we apply that in terms of risk quantification across the state. And for us, it really is a fantastic way to have an attacker's perspective on your environment. And when we start to think about how to implement security controls, whether it's from CalSecure, whether it's adherence to SIMSAM, or whatever your organizational policies may be, you can almost leverage the attack surface intelligence or telemetry to prioritize your efforts, whether it's patch management, what do you go after first in terms of patching, whether it's trying to establish budgetary requirements so you can patch. It's sort of a way that you can take an attacker's perspective in your environment, find all those weak points that they may take advantage of, or probability of exposure is higher, and then apply some of those mitigating or compensating controls. Again, you think about patching, you think about software-defined networking and how to adjust the network to compensate for some of those security weaknesses. We think about encryption. We think about hardening the asset so that not only the asset itself is protected, but also the data that's resident on that asset is also protected. But yeah, that's from an attack surface perspective, we define it as a digital asset that's directly connected to the internet, and we highly encourage utilizing that information as a source of intelligence to feed your overall security program.
So, yeah, if I may add on to that, attacks could be opportunistic. Attacks could be targeted. A targeted attack starts with, reconnaissance or mapping out your environment, akin to a burglar going down the street, trying every single door that's locked or unlocked. But really, we ought to understand our attack surface. So it's kind of like a gap analysis, but with more context in a security defensive posture. So knowing where our assets are, what are our assets? Our assets are data, number one, users, networks, even organizations, or even some of the business partners that we deal with. There's a lot of different forms of assets that we ought to recognize and keep track of and manage continuously. And then apply tactics like attack surface discovery or reconnaissance with an attacker's perspective. So I see attack surface as really a process, and it's supported by multiple tools and services out there that we use really to help us discover that attack surface on a broad and wide scale, so that we could prioritize as such. And then when I say prioritize as such, we use attack surface telemetry to prioritize our entities, our organizations, figure out who are we going to audit or assess next, who are we going to send that that next alert that we see, to work with our agencies to help respond and recover and really investigate scope. So really, it's that mass analysis discovery process from an attacker's perspective that we use and really depend on within our multiple processes, from governance to threat to threat management.
So let me make sure I understand that attack surface description. It's really the situational awareness of our systems from end to end. Going back to the analogy that you mentioned, if I want to come rob your house, I'm going to try your windows, I'm going to try your doors, I might come through an underground tunnel. All of those things are possible, but as you prioritize, you're looking for the things that are most likely and less guarded than maybe the others. And where can we interject either technical changes, educational changes to improve that level of security, really strengthen the weak spots across the whole gamut, not just in one area. It doesn't do any good to have great deadbolts on the door if you leave the windows wide open.
Yeah, and just to build upon that kind of an analogy, attack surface also needs to contextualize your layered security posture, your layered defenses, because attack surface services or processes, look for weaknesses in patch management, look for weaknesses in access controls, whether you have two-factor or you don't, or you have that deadbolt lock or you don't. So it really also takes account into some of those compensating controls that Jonathan mentioned that we may have. My house, if you want to rob my house, sure, I do have a deadbolt, but I don't rely on just that deadbolt. I have a big driveway, I have a big tough guy that you have to go through, and so on. Multiple layers of defense in depth and controls that are continuously practiced and managed.
Thank you. All right, let's dig in. The question I asked Vitaliy a little while, Jonathan, I'm going to redirect back to you. That landscape is always changing. It's hard to keep up. What are some of the challenges you face in the CalSIC, and how do you handle them?
So one of the biggest challenges that we face is really just workload. And I think almost every single entity out there that has a security program is probably suffering from the same issue, which is just there are insufficient resources. And we've seen as the threat grows, we've seen the need for cybersecurity professionals also grow, and that's created an incredible deficiency in the market space for talent. And so that's part of it, is just not having sufficient resources, people to hire. The second part of that is really automation and leveraging technology to help kind of fill that gap. And that's a focus area for us, has been and will continue to be, in terms of automating, building workflows in, so that as we're kind of receiving information, whether it's incident reporting, whether it's threat intelligence reporting from sharing programs that we have, we're able to then take those indications of attack or compromise and process them in an efficient way and leverage our technology to help us make some of those decisions, whether it's, we need to send out a team to do an incident response engagement, or we need to send a report out or a notification to an entity for further investigation. Whatever the case may be, we focus on automation to help close that gap.
All right, thank you. And let me just give you some forewarning. In about 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to play Stump the Cyber Guy. So if anybody that is watching has questions, start to wrap your head around those, go ahead and we'll ask you to raise your hands. We'll have our moderator call out your name. We'll help you unmute, and you can ask your question, and we'll see if we can come up with some really hard, entertaining questions for these guys. So coming back to cybersecurity, I'm a business manager or an IT manager in a department. And I have a suspicion we may have something going on, that there may be somebody in one of our systems that isn't supposed to be there. Who do I call? What bat signal do I throw up to get the CalSIC and the state response motivated?
So at that point, you would navigate to the CalCAESAR's reporting tool, and you would put in a notification into CalCAESAR's, which would then go to CDT, and then therefore the CalSIC, which would kick off a response or support. Again, that's if you are a state agency or department. If you are not, you can contact the CalSIC directly, which will kickstart a process of support to you via the CalSIC directly. And that can be found at CalSIC at caloes.ca.gov. So again, CalSIC, CALCSIC at caloes.ca.gov.
And I'll mention at the end of this, we'll actually put up a slide that has the contact information. So in case you didn't get that. As it relates to that incident response process, are there a couple of most important or critical components that you guys need to know as those things start to come in?
So CalCSR's acronym, California Cybersecurity Incident Reporting System, that's really a workflow, a platform that our state agencies depend on regarding reporting of incident as well as suspected incidents. So once you submit something within CalCSR's, that activates four of our major partners, California Department of Technology, SOC, OES, CalSIC, threat intelligence folks will take a look at a ticket, the military department, as well as the California Highway Patrol, the Computer Crimes Investigation Unit, as some of the cyber crimes may result in with a cyber-enabled crime. But really, incident reporting, we could go as broad or as narrow on both spectrums. So really, we encourage our departments to really report what they have. As of lately, we've been kind of lowering the reporting threshold. So if you see something anomalous or something out of the ordinary, report it. You know, definitely, we don't encourage you to report on something that's normal or like a mass scam that's going around on the internet that you see on a day-to-day basis. So really, it's those abnormal anomalies that you may see, or if a targeted scan is abnormal to you, definitely report it. So it's really reporting things out of the ordinary, but report as much of the technical details as possible so that we could react accordingly without overreacting or underreacting. And then we have folks and analysts on the backside that'll contact organizations directly.
So when somebody does have an incident and they've done the appropriate reporting, we've now got the CalSIC engaged and other people at CDT. Does that cost the department money? How does that process work when we are engaged in helping them to resolve it?
So really, reporting does not cost anything. We had transitioned our security operations center and our audit team to be a general fund augmented team from a fiscal perspective. So what that really means, it's a cost of doing business. So we have certain macro or wide area network monitoring controls embedded and implemented within the data center, the California Government Enterprise Network, such as denial of service protection controls. We have our network protection team that continuously operates and maintains a statewide intrusion prevention and detection system, along with the partnership of DHS CISA. We have a couple of sensors on our network that monitor and exchange critical threat intelligence with CISA, that we also rely on their analysis and investigation to notify the state. So we in turn work with our potentially victim departments to help triage and really go through the incident response lifecycle process to contain, investigate, and then ultimately contain an incident. So it kind of runs a gamut there.
So for a long time, the state has been very active in emergency response for fires and floods or civil unrest and things along those lines. Now we have our technology systems that are a critical component of state business. There are a lot of things that just can't be done, or at least not as effectively, if the technology layer is not there. So if there is some sort of an attack that actually penetrates into our systems, whether it be ransomware or something else, obviously we can't shut it off and say we're going to wait for a budget cycle in order to fund some sort of a response or to recover things. One of the developments in the last year is that we're looking at our IT systems as critical infrastructure, just like water management and a number of other systems in the state. And what that does is give us the ability to react quickly and essentially draw on the same type of emergency funding as a wildfire. And so I want to emphasize the point for all of our departments and our partners that help us address these situations. Quick response is really, really important here. The faster that we can catch it and correct it and get back into business, the better. So if you think your department has been compromised, your organization has been compromised, asking those questions, raising your hand, asking for that help, better to over respond and find out that it's not as big as we thought it was, than wait for it to develop to make sure that we're in a bad spot before we kick off that fire alarm. So please engage these folks as quickly as you can on that. So I mentioned acronym soup a little while ago with cybersecurity. One of the organizations we start to hear about now is CSA. And so first, what is CSA?
CSA, that's one of our partners in cybersecurity, the California State Auditors. So they are an independent watchdog oversight organization as it pertains to anything government accountability related, not just cybersecurity.
How are they engaged in the cybersecurity process? What's their focus, and how does that benefit the overall vision?
Really, the CSA currently, they're focused on really auditing and assessing our oversight process and our ability to really keep all of those departments and agencies accountable. But then on top of that, how do we enforce that accountability and make those departments move? So it's really their main mission and goal in life is to strengthen our ability to do a good thing for the state, which is really increase our ability to help agencies mature in their cybersecurity journeys. And they'll really focus on looking at our auditing, assessment authority, our policy framework. So it's always good to have kind of a second pair of eyes and an additional check and balance to what we're doing for the state. So really, with the audit that we've recently underwent, they've provided some valid recommendations that we're taking seriously and always augmenting and improving our process in terms of policy governance and oversight. There are some things that they did not focus on, such as kind of our incident responsibility and some of the tactical and operational efforts that we've really baked in or implemented over the last year and a half to keep our departments and agencies out of hot water, keep our departments and agencies out of hot water as it pertains to dealing with supply chain issues, ransomware, SolarWinds, Log4j. So there are multiple things that we did together as a task force to help those agencies stay out of hot water when it pertained to SolarWinds. Another example is going back to telework enablement. When COVID first started back in beginning of 2020, we were tasked to figure out what the capability or ability was as it pertains to departments' capacity to provide remote environments within for their workforce. So we've conducted a kind of a mass assessment using our personnel at the military department within OES to figure out what the gaps are in access controls and various forms of implementations of remote work. So we've done multiple efforts there in the tactical and responsive and operational side.
All right, thank you, Vitaliy. In general, I think it's fair to say whether it's CSA, questions we get from the legislature, or policy that comes down, statute changes, cybersecurity is difficult, constantly changing, and we're all focused on making the business of the state more secure and continually raising that bar. And I think there are a whole bunch of organizations trying to push that and continue that conversation, all for the greater good in California. So we really do appreciate that. So maybe the last topic, and then we'll go to Stump the Cyber Guy and have some questions from everybody. Right now in the world, there's obviously a lot of focus on the geopolitical issues that are going on, specifically the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. That has spun off an intense or acute awareness of cybersecurity. Are we doing things differently because of that conflict?
Absolutely. So I think there's a number of efforts currently underway. The first is mirroring the federal government's approach to widening their aperture for reporting on threat intelligence. So as federal governments and our federal government, be it FBI, be it CISA through their Shields Up website as an example, are actually widening their aperture for reporting, we're doing the same. Second piece there is really looking at utilizing that threat intelligence more actionably across the state. Great example is, as we're seeing threat actors, as an example, cybercrime gangs, Conti as an example, active out in the Ukraine. We're also taking those IOCs and we're applying them to California. Do we see IOCs establishing command and control communications? Do we see the vulnerabilities Conti and the ransomware are leveraging resident on attack surfaces across California? We're taking all of this information in aggregate and really applying it not only to state agencies, but also our most critical infrastructure across the state. And those are just two of sort of levels of effort that we're currently engaged in, specifically to support Russia, the Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree that we're kind of widening our aperture or kind of raising our level of alertness or a healthy level of paranoia, and then being able to work together a lot closer as it pertains to internal bureaucracies of state government, as well as collaborating with our federal partners and with our private sector vendors. There's multiple committees, subcommittees established at the state as well as at the national level to kind of provide think tanks of how do we kind of collaboratively tackle the threat and the attack surface out there at a macro scale, not just a unified as a siloed organization. So there's definitely an increased level of alertness and better collaboration than there has ever been before.
Thank you both. I appreciate that. Now let's see. Do we have some questions at this point? No Stump the Cyber Guy questions yet. Okay, we'll see if we can make up some in the room. That looks like there are a couple coming in right now.
We do have one question, and I apologize if I mispronounce this. Raghuvera Rayola.
Howdy, yeah, this is Raghu. How are you doing? This is Raghu from Ernst & Young. Thank you so much. It was very instructive to hear the three of you talk about it and about cybersecurity in the state. And I've spent some time looking at CalSecure. I think it's a phenomenal step forward. And my question is primarily to you, Jonathan. And you'd mentioned skill shortage and automation in the same sentence, and automation as a way to overcome skill shortage. What challenges do you see, however, though, from skills shortage in your automation efforts? And maybe this bleeds into CalSecure territory where you're trying to do workforce development. How do these kind of tie together, and how do you envision solving it?
I think the skill shortage is really across the board. So at the CalSIC specifically, we have a variety of cyber threat intelligence roles. We have threat hunting roles. We have incident response roles, digital forensics roles. We even have capability around malware reverse engineering. And so, you know, our skills shortage is across the board. And that's just because those kind of skills are just really difficult to find and also retain. And we try to answer that question by really looking toward our labor workforce and development cyber task force subcommittee, which Vitaliy mentioned, and really looking at how do we build pipelines into the educational system at large, starting as early as middle school, all the way through to internship programs post university, looking at leveraging those kind of systems that are being developed and have been put in place and the supporting legislation thereafter to kind of help alleviate. Now that's a long burn, right? That doesn't happen overnight. It's a pipeline. So in the interim, we are leveraging technology to help us, specifically via automation. Not only automating workflows like we think about with security orchestration, automated response, right? Not just the Demistos of the world as an example, but also looking at how do we redefine cybersecurity architecture? How do we redefine what good looks like in the incident response and threat intelligence space? And one of the answers we're arriving at is actually building a common cybersecurity common operating platform. So a true single pane of glass. And I know that terminology has been around for, I don't know, probably too long at this point. But really developing a workbench or a single access point for cybersecurity for the state of California, whether that's access to knowledge articles because you need a template for an incident response plan, or you need to check out some CrowdStrike licenses and call us out to do some hunting because you have a suspected issue in your environment. Even in the threat intelligence space, so enrolling for our morning reports or requesting some enrichment support with threat intelligence and what we collect. And that itself is a challenge, right? I don't think anyone today has really built a true single pane of glass platform specifically that can scale to a state the size of 39.6 million people, 50 plus counties, 588 cities. And so that's the challenge that we're working on now from a technology perspective. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And while we're waiting for some other questions to come in, and we need some gotchas for these guys, let me ask Vitaliy, another term that we throw around is SOC. What is the SOC and how does it relate to CalSec?
Really, the Security Operations Center, that's a built-in or one of these commoditized built-in managed security controls at the wide area network that we provide for over 100 plus different state agencies, as well as extending some of the internal threat monitoring for approximately 30 departments that do not have security personnel or security teams. So that's just one way or example that we try to augment and really implement automation to help sustain our security operational efforts. So really it's that eye in the sky for our state agencies. And the more we could kind of commoditize a lot of these security services and embed them into all things we do, whether it's a network, a business process, an application, and so forth, the less we'll have to do things on the IT operator administrator side. I don't want to send out folks to build and maintain a system. I want folks to really dive in and use those systems for its intended purpose. So the more commoditized we can get and service-based, the better off we'll be. Really, I want our security professionals to focus on some of the more advanced, sophisticated tasks that cannot be automated. So it's really maintaining and managing that balance with automation, with our workforce and training, as well as integrations. We definitely, as we automate things, we need to focus on how can we integrate better. Whether it comes to a tool or a process. I want all of my security tools to be just as easily integratable, meaning I could deploy it, implement it just as easy as I could decommission it, take it out, and introduce a new security control. Our security roadmaps need to be more adaptable, malleable, so that we could keep up with the ever increasing attack landscape. So we really need to be adaptable. We often cannot standardize on a 5-year roadmap and be just static about it. We have to be able to pivot on a weekly, daily, quarterly basis.
Thank you. All right, so maybe one last big question for each of you to address. If you could, with this audience, which is a mix of state representatives or vendor partners out there, if there's one thing that you could ask people to do that raises the security bar, that would help us be successful from each of your perspectives, what would that be? Jonathan, you want to go first?
Sure, I would say promote cyber transparency within your organization, meaning don't let cybersecurity live behind an iron curtain. Be open with your leadership and your management, whether it's about vulnerabilities that you may have exposure to, whether it's about incident reporting or your audit performance. It's critically important to be fully transparent, even in the event of an incident. especially in the event of an incident. So that's what I would encourage is transparency.
Yeah, I mean, just making risk an everyday conversation, enabling everybody to be a risk-based professional, from the legal team to your communications person to even your family at home. Talk to everybody about risk and what it means to compensate, mitigate. Because at the end of the day, as an individual, we all deal with some level of risk. The more we can talk about it, translate it into real life terms, the better off we'll be, and make it an easier conversation to swallow, it beyond just it having to be a technical conversation.
All right, thank you. And I want to double down on that a little bit for both our vendor partners and our state representatives. Cybersecurity is a big, scary topic, and it can have huge negative consequences for us. But part of the way to relieve that is exactly what you guys talked about. We've got to first talk about it, but as we address it, we've got to talk about it not as techno geeks using acronyms and NIST standards and things along those lines. We need to put it in the terms of the business that we operate, whether we're a taxation organization, a benefits organization, or it really doesn't matter. We've got to connect with our people that run the business side of the organization and really have those fundamental conversations about what cybersecurity is, the risks to our business, and now what do we need to do to protect our business. Some of those conversations might go beyond cybersecurity, but they're related. We've always talked about physical controls, and some of our sites actually have physical security and cameras and things along those lines. Cybersecurity fits in that same conversation. How do we control our assets? How do we protect our people from being enticed by phishing emails or whatever that might be? They expose the same business. And so elevating that conversation would be the thing that I would ask everybody in this to do, both from our vendor partners as we have conversations and we interact with our line of business organizations. Cybersecurity's got to be there, but it can't be just a technical topic. There's the why it matters too, and that's where we need to have that conversation. Thank you again. Any closing comments you guys want to make?
No, just thank you for having me. Stay cyber safe. And if anyone in California ever needs cyber support, you can contact CalSIC at caloes.ca.gov. We're here to help. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned, this is the first of our Tech Talks with CDT. We're hoping to do more of these. One of the things we want to know is how well this went. So I'll be transitioning back to Janelle momentarily. She'll give you some information on how to respond and where we go from there. So Janelle. Sure, if there's one more question, we do have another minute.
Hello, this is Sean Lawrence. I'm with Sentinel One. Just had a quick question for you. Nice to talk to you all, and thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I was just thinking about, you all discussed the attack surface earlier, and with relation to that, how does this tie into the zero trust architecture and the role the state plays in that? And back to what Vitaliy said on, where would you see the integration points? And even back to the single pane of glass that that Jonathan mentioned, how do you see all of that tying into a zero trust and with regards to the attack surface and such?
All right, let me add one component to that. What is zero trust first?
Zero trust. It's a broad topic. I wouldn't say it's solely a marketing topic. It's definitely a topic that goes along with your architecture model on how you control trust, how you control and manage trust to your sensitive assets, being your data, your users, your accounts, and really posturing that level of access based on trust in a dynamic and fluid way, so that you could contextualize and be risk aware and assess risk on a transaction by transaction basis as it pertains to those elements of trust. So I think zero trust architectures, and there are models out there. The national President Biden President Biden's office released a framework on zero trust that we're also looking into adopting within our policy framework. But it has to definitely, it definitely aligns with what we do. And it is a subcomponent of attack surface. It's contextual as it pertains to attack surface.
Just to add on to that, I think, you know, when I think about any of these kind of terms that come out for cybersecurity and the thing that we're supposed to do next, right? Whether it's zero trust in this example, I always think from a decision maker perspective, from a security program perspective, you start with what you know, right? Whether zero trust is asking you to go back and lock your systems down or implement additional policies, you got to start with what you know first, and then you can figure out what you need to fix. Attack surface, in my view, Sean, is maybe part of the first step, right? Identifying what you think you know, and maybe highlighting, hopefully, what you don't know, so that it does become within your view, to then do something about, right? Whether that's digital assets, maybe you didn't know you had 50,000 assets out on the internet, right? Maybe you thought you had 8,000 instead of 50. That's information that you can use to help lock your environment down, whether it's, you know, insecure protocol usage, unauthenticated remote access. All of these issues can be kind of pulled out through that attack surface process and be applied whichever way you'd like, right? Whether it's zero trust or any other kind of initiative that we should be undergoing as part of managing a security program. I hope that answers your question, Sean.
Okay, thank you. And I think it resonates with really what we talked about. Zero trust in general in our attack surfaces. So we talk about attack surfaces, people are an attack surface, the interfaces that we have into our systems are attack surfaces, they're things that can be exploited. Zero trust, I think, really means that just because someone says, I'm a user, let me in, doesn't mean we simply let them in based on that assertion. What do we actually validate? Whether it's a system, a person, prove to me that you are a responsible party that's authenticated to be in the system, and then we'll open the door and let you in, rather than letting people in and trying to ferret out the good and the bad. So with that, we'll wrap this up. I'm going to go ahead and transition back to Janelle momentarily. Again, we're looking for your feedback on the session. If it was valuable, if you'd like to see this repeated, if you have topics you'd like to see addressed, please get those to us, and we will look at repeating this type of a session in the future. We're asking questions from the length of the session. Is it too short, too long? Are there specific items you'd like us to cover, or ways we would like to do this in the future? So with that, again, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Janelle, let me hand the ball to you, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Russ. And thank you very much to our panel here, Vitaliy, Panych, and Jonathan Nunez, and our host, Russ Nichols. Excuse me. All right. Caught you there. If you have any further questions or comments, please send them to your security questions to the CalSIC at caloes.ca.gov. Reference the slide here. And if you have would like to receive the recording link, you can contact events at state.ca.gov, or you can select the QR code there and get that. It's just 3 questions, and we would appreciate any feedback. And thank you for participating, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.